I was born in Rock Island, Illinois, in 1917, July 16th.
Did you grow up in Rock Island?
I did. I didn't leave there until I entered the convent at the age of 19.
And what was your given name?
I knew you'd ask me this. Innocence Victoria Chineworth.
Where did the name Innocence come from?
My mother had read a book, as I was telling them shortly before now, just before I was born. My sister was here 2 years, safely named Magdalene. And she said, if I ever have another little girl, I'm going to call her Innocence. In those days, you didn't know until the baby was born whether it was boy or girl. And, of course, I came, and I was a girl, and I was christened Innocence Victoria. Victoria was my mother's name. And it was a name I was always told I should be proud of and happy, but I was always embarrassed by it. My nickname was Innie. And I tried to get Victoria to be called Vicky, but it wouldn't work. So I had to be called Innocence in school all through my school years. And, of course, when I began dating, it was very embarrassing because the young men would say, are you? So I said, well, I guess I'll enter the convent. No, I'm just joking. I had a call to the convent since I was 4 years of age, so I didn't enter the convent to change my name, but I say facetiously, I entered the convent to get rid of my name.
But Innocence is prophetic, I think, as it turned out to be. Tell me about your parents. What were their professions or educational levels?
They weren't professional. They were very bright. Both of them were very bright. My mother was a telephone operator. She probably went through what is called high school now. And my father stopped his formal education at the 4th grade level to put his sister through school, which is strange, but anyway, that's what happened. But he was a very brilliant man. And even he became a shoe repairman. And at his death, we found under his cobbler's bench a complete set of encyclopedias.
Oh, my.
That tells you what kind of man he was.
Yes, and the fact that he sent his sister through school, I think is very interesting.
He what?
That he sent his sister through school.
Yes, I think that was very
interesting,
yes,
yes,
because she was younger than he was, and, you know, we thought, well, why didn't he get himself to school? And then,
yes.
But that wasn't the way he did it.
That's very good. I understand that your father's marriage proposal to your mother is a cherished story in your family. Would you share the story of how he proposed to your mother?
We love to hear that story. We'd often say, Mother, tell us how Daddy proposed. And she would blush and say, well, you know, in those days we didn't have automobiles, and we had a bicycle built for two. And when your father was courting me, we ride along on the bicycle built for two. And he said one day, we fickle well together, don't we, honey? And she said, yes, we do. He said, would you fickle through life with me?
Oh, I tell you.
He was so romantic.
Yes. And he sounds so conscientious about women and respectful.
Oh, he was
I mean,
so
I still
respectful.
am very impressed about the fact that he sent his sister through school during that time.
That's right.
Yes. What a wonderful person. What were your parents' ethnicities?
My father was an African American whose father was a slave from Madagascar. My mother was a German, first in her family born in this country. They were immigrants from Bavaria, Germany. And their meeting was a very strange meeting. So many times when I say my father was African American, my mother was German, they right away think war bride.
Yes.
But this was 1911.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle Otto, my mother's brother, was giving a party with her at the house, my grandparents' home, and they were getting the guest list ready, and he said, do you have anybody else in mind? And she was a telephone operator, and she'd heard my father's voice, and she said, well, that Alec sounds like he has such a nice voice. Could we put him on the guest list? And my uncle said, sure. They were good friends. And he said, sure. So added Alec to the list. And Alec came to the party and fell in love with my mother at that party. And he began courting. And in time, he asked my grandfather for my mother's hand in the old traditional way.
Very good.
And my grandfather was a businessman who was a partner to Hilliker and Slicker he was a slicker of Hilliker and Slicker, and he said, well, I don't know what that would do to my business. He said, I love Alec. He's a nice, very nice guy, and I certainly don't object to your marrying him, but I would appreciate it very much if you crossed the state line and marry in Iowa instead of Nebraska. So it was all right with them. They crossed, and it was interesting to when I entered the convent and had to get my parents' wedding license, marriage license. The clerk who wrote it looked at my mother and wrote Victoria Magdalene Schlicker, white. And then he looked at my father, he or she looked at my father and said, Alexander Roth Chineworth, Negro. And then that white and Negro just didn't match. So they put a line through the white and put Negro over my mother's name.
I see.
When I got that, I said to my mother, what about this? She said, you want us to get it changed? I said, no, we know who we are.
Yes, exactly.
Didn't matter at all to me.
That's right. But because they were an interracial couple, were there difficulties for them eventually you were born in Rock Island.
Right.
Were there difficulties in that environment as you were growing up for your mother and father?
Apparently not. My father was headed for Chicago, and travel was by train. And there was a Dr. Davis and his wife on the train, and they had become friends. Friendly couple. Trains are long, and we have time to get to know one another. And they found that my father was headed for Chicago to set up his business, and he was headed for Rock Island to set up his practice. And they had taken a home that was 2 stories, a duplex, I think they call it. And they said, well, why don't you try Rock Island for your business instead of going into Chicago? And you could have the downstairs apartment, and we'll have the upstairs apartment, and maybe you'd like it. So on the train, en route to Chicago, they changed their plans and stopped in Rock Island. And the rest of the story, you know. I'm the second oldest.
Oh, you're the second? Of 4.
My
the
sister
second
was
oldest.
And my 2 brothers were younger.
Okay. And one of your brothers was a Tuskegee Airman?
Yes, my younger brother.
Will you tell us a little bit about his history as a Tuskegee Airman?
He was the sweetest little boy, and everybody loved him. And when he grew up and graduated from high school, we were in World War II. And he got into the Air Force, went to Tuskegee, got his wings and his whatever it is, his jet. And he was one of the first pilots to fly over Munich, I believe. And didn't get scabbed at all. He was a fighter pilot. When he came back, his wife, a New Orleans Creole, insisted that he get out of the Air Force. She couldn't stand the strain of having him fly. But it was interesting that before he got out, he was offered a very high position, and apparently on the merits of something, but they didn't know he was Tuskegee. I don't know whether it was flying prowess or what it was, but anyway, he was offered this on the telephone, and he said, wait a minute, before you go any further, I'm colored, and I want you to know that. Silence. Oh, excuse me, we made a mistake. So you see, you get it everywhere.
Yes.
Everywhere you turn. He eventually got out of the Air Force and dug ditches at first because he had $50,000 education, but there was no job prospect in this whole town.
The way you put the amount of money on it, the cost of it. But it's interesting also that he was stationed in Germany since your mother is German.
Yes.
How did your mother feel about that?
Well,
because it was anti-Germany, of course.
We're in touch with our German family, of course, and we've always been in touch. But now the next generation is more in touch with them because they have studied medicine and they have gone on rotations over there and so forth. So they have had contact, and I've learned more through them.
Yes. And
I myself, of course, have visited them. But my mother, I don't think, thought about anything but to get him back safe, you know.
Yes.
She didn't care where he was, just so he comes back safe.
Yes.
But when he flew over Germany and fought, as a fighter pilot and then came back safely, I don't know the duration of the time that he was there. But when he was mustered out of the Air Force, he took one job after another, and his worth was recognized.
Yeah.
And he went straight up, but for the company the electric company he was with. But then he decided that he wanted to be a podiatrist.
Oh.
So he studied podiatry at Northwestern University, and did just a brief practice. Really, he got tired of looking at teeth. And he had his practice in the mezzanine floor of the Sutherland Hotel in Chicago, and below that mezzanine floor was a huge drugstore. And for a little extra money, he would manage this drugstore when the owner was away. So when the owner wanted to sell, he offered it to him as first choice, and he and his wife decided to buy that, and that was one of the smartest things they did. So he really gave up his practice and went into business.